and today I'm going to use paper palettes. You can also use paper plates, and I'm just going to use these cups here. I've got a little bit of water in a bigger cup, so this is my source water. I do have, when I set up, if I'm going to use 2 or 3 colors, then I'm going to get a cup of water for each color, and I'm also going to get a brush for each color. So it's important to me to keep my colors clean and to keep them consistent. And as we've talked about keeping colors consistent and clean in terms of printmaking, we also, of course, want to do that in terms of painting so that we can do our color separations properly, right? Let me just get a sheet of watercolor paper ready here. If you're working on a nice table or you want to make sure that you're not spilling, I recommend something like a trash bag. This little garbage bag solution works for me. But it's really important to me that you use as little plastic as possible. Sometimes when you're cleaning up at the end of the day, you'll want to just take these cups and wipe them out with a paper towel and reuse them instead of tossing plastic every day at the end of your session. The other thing I think that's really important is that you let your paint dry before you throw it away, because anytime you put wet paint into a plastic bag and you tie it up and send it to the landfill, then the paint is seeping down into the soil and getting into the water, and it's killing the wildlife, basically. Right. Also, washing paint down the drain is a real problem. Paints are more and more environmental, and probably these paints that FITM has bought for you are very environmental, because everything that we use in the classroom now is very environmental, but I still try to make sure that I'm not washing things down. Like this is cadmium yellow. Cadmium is sort of poisonous, even though it comes from the earth. So you want to be careful when you're using paints. I like to arrange my paints in a color wheel before I start, because that helps me to find things and I'm not just like sorting through junk and stuff. I put my browns off to the side by the yellows. So you've got burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber, and yellow ochre. They constitute your browns. And then black and white kind of don't go in the color wheel either, but the other colors should loop around. This week it's going to be very important for you to open up every single tube and make a mark with it so that you're seeing what all those colors are.
Okay.
All right, so that's part of what I want you to do in your sketchbook, is to use all the colors and see what happens with the different colors. We see a stripe on the outside of the tube, and you know, if you use markers at all, that you see a stripe there, and it may or may not be
the same, yeah.
May or may not be the same, yeah. The color that says burnt on it, like burnt sienna and burnt umber, are going to be warmer. So raw umber is going to be a cooler color than the burnt umber. Usually burnt means it's got a little bit of red or orange to it. But I'm basically arranging my paint colors like this, just so that I can see what I've got, you know, my black and my white, my browns, and then my color wheel here, so that I know if I'm leaning towards a blue and my red and a purple and then a purpley blue, or if it gets to be a bluish green or a yellowish green, that kind of thing is helpful to me. And And I'm just going to put a little bit of water in each cup. It's not very much at all. Just a few tablespoons is enough to wet my brushes and rinse them out as I go from one to the other. What this does for me is it makes it so I'm not like dumping a lot of water down the drain. Then I keep my main main cup clean so that I know that I've got some fresh, clean water. A lot of times students feel frustrated when they're mixing colors. Remember that you can get up and change your water, you know, and you can clean your brushes and you can do all that kind of stuff and start over again from scratch. And doing that often will help you to stay more consistent with your colors. Okay, consistency is a big deal in this class as we deal with color separations, as we're limiting our colors, and as we're working with consistency. I always dip my brush in the water before I start, and I need to have paper towels nearby. So I've always got what they call a blotter, watercolor, right? I've always got a paper towel next to me so that I can take that and wipe that out. So basically this is now it's not wet or dry really, but it's got some water in the fibers. I think these are synthetic brushes, which is good for gouache. But let's just take a color. I don't put a lot of color down, and that's part of the reason that I like a plate or a piece of paper instead of like a palette or a little cup like this kind of thing. This is going to be good if you're working on a project over time or you want to do a very large project. But to get started, what I want you to do is just squeeze out a very little bit of paint, get your paintbrush wet, and then go into that paint and kind of see what that consistency is, right? And then I want you to put it on the page. So I want you to see how that consistency lays, how you would make a clean mark or a sharp mark. I want you to notice little details about this thing that I've just put down. Notice how the tooth of the paper is getting me like this mottled surface where I'm seeing white through the blue. Notice that at this end of it, I'm seeing brush strokes here where I have a little bit of what I might call a hairy edge at this end of it, right? So if I add a little more water, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dip in here. I'm not going to rinse really. I'm just going to dip because I'm trying to keep this water clean. And I'm going to mix more water over here on my palette.
Okay.
This becomes a little more wet in my brush, and I'm going to do another mark. Notice how different that mark is than the first one, right?
Yeah.
Let's push it. Let's go with even more water. When I start to see the paper through like that, I've gone too far. So this is a little bit too thin. This is a little too thin. This is too thick. I can actually go over top of this with my watery brush and notice how I'm filling that in now, right? I have a bit too much water in my brush. I feel like I'm getting this watercolor edge at the end of it. And gouache is meant to be opaque, okay? We're not going to be doing washes like we do with watercolor. So I'm just going to take this brush, I'm going to tap it on a paper towel like that. That's going to get a lot of the water out, and it's going to make it so that I can paint with this gouache in a way that I want to. So I'm trying to get a nice consistency over here, and I keep brushing into it. I sort of brush off the edge of the glop that I made. So what should I call that?
The glop is good, yeah.
I made a glop, right? And I sort of work away from that edge, and I leave that because that also helps it to keep from drying out. If I keep pulling away from that, instead of mixing it all up at once into the same consistency. So I'm thinking about consistency as I work, but I feel like I'm getting now something that's really not letting any paper show through. It's getting me a pretty good edge on it. Now, certainly this edge right here, if I had a line made, let's say that I was trying to paint a 2x2 inch square like you need to do for your assignment, right? First of all, I would measure it. I do have a ruler here, but right now what I want to do is give myself a challenge. So I've made a shape, and I want to go in here and I want to paint right up to that line, and I want to make a smooth edge. So now I'm moving the paintbrush back and forth this direction instead of this direction, because see how I got this hairy edge on each one of those things?
Yeah.
If I move the paintbrush a little bit this way at the edges, then of course I'm going to get a flatter thing, and then I pull away from that, right? So I went this way along here, and then I'm pulling away from it towards the center. Looks like my paint's dried out. I need to get some more water, get some more paint. It's a little bit too wet. This is better. Pull away from the edge to the center. Don't be hesitant at all ever to move your paper. If I pull it to the other edge, I'm going to get this kind of an edge. You can't see what I'm working on now. If I moved my paper, if I move my brush across, then I'd get this kind of thing at the edge, and that's really ragged, right? So I want to turn it over to get the other edge started and get that nice and even, and then pull away from that. This is the same thing as when you use markers. You want to make a line along the edge and then pull away from it. I probably want to go in here, make sure this edge is nice and clean, and then I want to go in here and make sure this edge is nice and clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm doing this all with the square brush. I want to use as big a brush as possible to do my job. If I start going in to fill in this square with this, I'm going to go scribble, 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 and you're going to see all those marks eventually in the gouache because it's going to dry as I go.
Right.
So I want to use as big a brush as possible. All right. For your 2 by 2 inch squares, so every week in your assignment, you're going to turn in swatches.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to take a photograph of your swatches. So I'm going to take the pencils that I got, and I'm going to grab my ruler. I never measure from the end of a ruler because that's not too accurate. I always start here at the 1 and go here to the 3, right?
Okay.
It's also good to measure from the edge of the page. So if I wanted to get this set up here, I'd go to 3, and I'd go here to 3. Or your first line painting is going to be 6 colors. And they're going to be in repetition with a variation. So you're going to show your repetition with variation. So that means if you're just doing a line, we've talked about how a line can go differently, right? So with this, I want you to do mark making like this too. Like I could do a line like this. I could do a line like this. I can do a line like this. I can do a line like this, right? So I want you to take these brushes and I want you to experiment with how many different kind of marks you can make, right? So you're going to do some mark making. And then when you get to your lines, you're going to be much more efficient at mixing colors and making your colors work and keeping your colors consistent and making lines. Anytime you mix colors in your paint, you're desaturating them and you're graying them out, all right? So tone is a term that we're going to use to mean basically everything else except for pure color, right? Or mixed with white or black, all right? So tones of a color could mean anything. So I've asked you to use tints, tones, and shades. I'm not worried about color theory or anything like that right now as much as I am about you mixing paint up and figuring out how to mix some different colors. Okay. One concept that we talked about at the beginning of class that we want to get really firmly in our head throughout the quarter is color separation. So I want you to, color separation means each color is its own color and we're not mixing and blending a lot on the palette. We're choosing colors from the start and then we're painting in those colors in flat areas of color. Okay, that's pretty much how we're going to work through the whole quarter.
Okay.
The reason we do that is so we can work with indexed color. I don't know if you've done Photoshop for textiles, but indexed color means that you choose for, like in this case, you would choose 6 colors and white, right? Because white is where the paper is going to show through. And then your computer would not allow you to do any other different color, right? So if you went to put a green in, it would automatically make it the sap green that you've chosen from the get-go. Okay. We don't have that ability when we paint here. So our challenge here is going to be consistency. Again, consistency, consistency, right? It's easy to be consistent with these things that come right out of the tube. So I can fill that right in with blue. I'm going to decide now though what my tint or my tone or my shade is going to be. For this first one, let's say I'm going to do a white. I'm just going to do a tint to see what happens. What you should know is that each of these paints has a different consistency. As I squeeze the white out, I notice that it has a different thickness than the blue does, okay? So your paint tubes, the different colors, are also gonna have different consistencies. If I take my palette knife, I always mix dark into light, right? So I basically wanna keep my white here and put a little bit of blue into it. If I mix the two together, I might get something much darker than I want, right? Notice that by mixing white into here, I've desaturated it, right? This color here is not as intense as the original color that I have. So as soon as you mix another color in, you're desaturating. I'm gonna take my palette knife, I'm gonna push it around a little bit. Okay, so I've got now a tint. Is this the way I want to go with that? It's nice. I think I want to go a little bit darker. So I'm going to pull a little bit more blue into it. Now this is a case where I might want to be mixing into one of these cups, right? Especially if I was going to do a whole painting with this. If I'm going to do a whole stripe painting and I'm going to cover an entire sheet of paper, I'm going to need to mix enough of this that I can fill up at least this jar a quarter of the way so that I can paint across my page and not have problems with having to remix, right? The paint changes color when it dries too, so it's hard to mix paint to match a paint that already exists because then you've got that problem. All right, so this is going to be my next tone. I'm using the same brush as I used before, but I'm pushing it around in the paint so that it mixes up in my brush and I don't get stripes of dark through the light, right? If I were to mix light paint into dark paint, if I had gone white into the blue, then I would waste a lot of paint because I'd keep putting more white, more white, more white, more white, more white. And so yeah, that's one reason why I always do light into the dark, or sorry, the dark into the light. I take my little finger when I paint, right? So just like a snob would hold their teacup like this, right? Or someone who's got that those manners, those English manners, hold their little pinky finger out. As a painter, I do that too. I'm sort of feeling along the page as I go. I kind of know now how far I am from the page and all that kind of stuff. And I actually can lean on the page over here, and that gives me the ability to be more delicate about my strokes and my marks, right? So I hold my brush here and I have my finger firmly on the page over here. And then I'm just using this gesture right here to move across that line. And my paint's already drying out, so I need to tap into my water. I'm using the same water that I used for the dark blue, for the light blue, because the water is not saturated with paint, so it's going to be okay. I'm probably not tapping the bottom where I have that little bit of blue paint. I'm moving a little bit slowly here, and then when I get to here, I can pull much more quickly across the page towards the middle. I probably see how I have that little blur going outside of the line. Probably want to turn my page again. I'm much better working up to a line than I am working down on a line, right? Working this way is really awkward. So I always work up to something. I like to turn my page a little bit to the diagonal as well, so that I'm actually working across. For some reason, this is the best line I can do, diagonally across the page. So turn your page so that you get your lines really nicely done, okay? I want you from week one to practice this painting up to a line, to make it so that, see how I've got these sort of little bit of ragged edges here? I want to do better next time. I want to keep practicing so that I can really have the line that I want at the edges. And then I also want to work for consistency. So I'm having you do 2-inch squares this time. I want you to make sure the color, the strokes, the blend, the flow across that is all very consistent. There's nothing like this white showing through here I'm going to make sure that that's all covered. I'm going to make sure that I have a nice, even paint chip to submit next week, because this paint chip is what we're going to read when we go to do printing of fabrics, right? Then I can go out into my assignment, and if I have, you know, flowers or circles, let's just make something here for me to draw. This is something else I'd like you to do, is just kind of start making shapes like this and think about whether they overlap and whether they do something, and then pick a shape and fill it in with a color. So now instead of just doing straight lines, I'm practicing my my curvilinear line as well. Once again, I'm using as big a brush as I can to do my work. I really like my big flat brush. This has a nice flow to it. It gets areas covered quickly. I'm going to work up to this edge one more time just so I don't see the white next to the pencil mark. Fill in large areas. If you want to, you can go in with another brush. You may want to take your round brush or a medium brush. Tap it in there and then tap it on a blotter or get the water out of it. Go back into your paint and then use this to go up to the edges. So there's two different attitudes that you have this week in making your work. One is this kind of attitude here, where I'm taking this brush and I'm saying, how many marks can I make with this? I can make that line. I can make this line. If I want that line to be consistent, looks like it has to be a little bit wetter, a little bit thinner. Add some water, see what happens. What happens if I lay it flat? I can make a big swash. I can make a little Nike swoosh. I can make coffee beans. I can do circles that are mostly round with this. It might be better to make a circle with this, right? Maybe I want to take this and do a round this way. Or maybe this is now a motif. This right here, this is an experiment I didn't intend to come out, but I've got this thing happening that goes sort of like this almost circle kind of thing. Here my hand's going right in the middle of my work. So you're going to be sent some tracing paper. Have a little bit of tracing paper that you can lay across dry paint so you're not smudging your hand and dragging across this all the time, all right? You want to protect the work that you've already painted so that when you go in here to paint this, you're not messing this up or dragging it around. Gouache is very delicate paint. Gouache is something that sits, like we set, up on top of the paper. All right, so I'm working here to get nice clean edges. I'm working here to control my hand. Once again, there's a little bit of a zen to this, right? This is why you get happy about going into your painting space, is because you have a real focus here. Along with that idea, sometimes I will do a stroke with the breath, right? So I find myself holding my breath when I really want something to work out, right? Which means I'm tensing up. So any game I can play with myself to not be tense. Music, I'll tell you what, I'm a better artist because I have music, right? So put some music on in your space if it relaxes you. If not, fine, just work in the quiet. But think about whatever you do to relax. You may want to take a breath with the movement. So if I decided to do this triangle, I might go, you know, because that breathing is actually keeping me in touch with my body, and it helps me to make a better line, right? Never paint in front of a class or have people watch you while you work. That's definitely an advanced technique. But I want you to try all your brushes. I want you to make some marks. Then I want you to go to the next step, which is making your marks conform to a drawing or conform to a shape that you've already made.